The Brandon Peters Show may contain explicit language and detailed plot points. For more information on the show, stay tuned to the end of the episode. And now, here's Brandon.
Welcome back to the Brandon Peters Show and our continued adventures through Tim Burton's big retrospective. Tim Burton. As always with me on this quest, Scott Mendelson from the Rap. W-R-A-P.
Fuck.
W-R-A-P. Not like him dropping rhymes and things like that.
Yeah, big life change. By the time you listen to this, I'll hopefully have more on the points on the board, so to speak. But I'm recording this at the end of my third day at the trade magazine.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. I mean, obviously, I don't want to go into too many whatever details, because hopefully I'll feel more confident about my whatever by the time you listen to this in the first place. But it's a learning curve.
Who's got the hot office romance going on currently over there?
Oh, I don't know.
All right, Scott, I want the
if
gossip.
I did, I wouldn't tell you.
I want the rap on the rap. Golly. All right. Well, there's some romance in this episode today. Their fifth installment of the Tim Burton retrospective. This one I could call August and everything after. But we're gonna be going over a animated series called The World of Stainboy, Big Fish from 2003, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory from 2005, and Corpse Bride also from 2005. Like every great director, they have a year where there's a twofer. So
this was his Munich.
This is his Munich. All right.
Or maybe his Amistad.
We shall see. We shall see as we get into it. We'll drive right into this World of Stainboy. Now this was
what the fuck is Stainboy, Brandon?
Well,
Stainboy. There's a house in Burbank where no one there dares enter the house of the girl who just stares. So it's up to you. Now get over there! And don't make a mess!
It's created by Tony Grillo. Tim Burton, of course, directed it. It's the cast is Glenn Shaddix, who would work with Burton, Lisa Marie, and then her final collaboration with Tim Burton, Will Amato, Michael R. Viner, with music by Danny Elfman and Jason Wells, animation by Flinch Studio. Local superhero Stainboy hunts down oddball villains, harnessing bizarre powers. It's a 6-part flash animation, and they're about 3 minutes 40 seconds to a little over 5.
Over under 4 minutes, give or take.
Mm-hmm. And the titles are Stare Girl, that's Toxic Boy, Bowling Ball Head, Robot Boy, Matchstick Girl, and the origin of Stainboy. Stainboy first appeared in 2 short poems in The Melancholy Death of Oyster Boy and Other Stories by Tim Burton. So
had that book.
Did you?
It did not make me cooler in school.
No. Is that the one they sold at Hot Topic?
Possibly. I bought it at Borders.
Okay.
Back in the day, Borders was a place you went to buy books that wasn't the internet.
Who'd have thought Barnes & Noble would win that battle and still
Not
be
me,
around?
Because I always freaking preferred Borders.
I was a Borders person myself.
Barnes & Noble always feels like a tomb. There's a certain cold, icy. I mean, Borders always felt warmer and more welcoming to me.
Yeah, I always went to Borders as well. The Borders where I grew up, it was once a children's palace then became a Best Buy, and then became a Borders, because Children's Palace went out of business. The Best Buy moved to a bigger building, and then Borders was there. And I don't know, they had overpriced stuff, but like you said, there was sort of a warmth to it. But Barnes & Noble, maybe it was all the side gigs they got going on in there. Like Borders had coffee too, but Barnes & Noble like got into the Kindle. They had the Nook. That was their thing.
Yes.
They also they sold like, well, now they have like puzzles and board games and Funko Pops, and well, who doesn't sell Funko Pops nowadays, honestly?
What was amused me about Barnes & Noble is their DVDs and Blu-rays were so friggin' expensive because they were usually, retail price. Then when they had a big sale, they were just, hey, you could now buy them for about what you could buy them anywhere else.
Yeah, unlike where Barnes & Noble, they have the Criterion sales that happen where they're 50% off and you're actually saving money.
Yeah,
and then
that was a weird exception to the rule.
Yeah, and BBC has those 50% off their titles as well with Barnes & Noble throughout the year. So maybe.
So was Tim Burton just bored during this period and decided to do a 6-episode flash animation?
I don't know. So these are like basically they have a similar structure to all of them, and the opening and closing is just recycled animation. The Stainboy guy goes to his like chief who's sitting by a desk, who's
very funny, by the way.
Yes, voiced by Glenn Shaddix, and he's like talks about someone to go get. So then he goes and confronts the person immediately. That anime character does some funky stuff. He goes back to the chief, and then it's over. And
it's basically the part of Phineas and Ferb with Platypus Barry the Platypus gets sent on yet another mission by the boss.
Yeah.
I mean, you can watch them all in like 15 minutes, give or take.
They're on YouTube.
Yeah, in decent quality.
Yeah, good quality. I don't know that they've ever been on any sort of official release of sorts or anything, but they're Flash, so they were probably originally intended to be free on the web, especially if it's 2000, 2001. There's no paywall for stuff like this.
No,
I wouldn't imagine.
And they're funny, they're clever, they're amusing. I'm just weirdly curious as to why they exist.
Yeah.
And I don't mean, obviously that's not a criticism, artists like to make art. But it's sort of like, I just finished Planet of the Apes, which maybe didn't go all that well for me. And
maybe this animation studio pitched it to him and was like, yeah, go for it.
But anyway, I don't want to be dismissive over something that I thought was perfectly entertaining.
No, it's fine. I mean, there's nothing deep to talk about with it. It's the animation. Yeah, it's good clarity. I don't know if they've been polished up for now that they're on YouTube and whatnot. But there's some good snickers to have with it. You'll watch. I mean, you could probably finish it in like 22 minutes, the whole thing, if that, because the first one's like 3.5 minutes, and I think
they're all pretty short.
The last one's like 5.5.
But there's only content for about the first 4 minutes.
Yeah, there's a lot of credit. Like there's like 45 seconds of it will be credits at the end. But yeah, I was like, oh, this is gonna be garbage. And then they're all short, and then I snickered a couple times. They're kind of fun. And we don't really need to talk about them longer than it would take you to watch them. But
pretty much, we're already halfway through.
Aside from Glenn Shaddix and Lisa Marie, that's about the most Burtonisms you can get, aside from the look of the animation. It did feel very Liquid Television, if you remember that show on MTV.
Oh yeah,
they felt like it could have popped up in there for a sec.
But yeah, highly recommended if you have 15 minutes to kill.
There you go. That's the Stainboy. All right, so now we'll move on to one of the best rebounds in cinema history, Big Fish.
For every father with a story to tell.
Which one's it gonna be?
The one about the witch.
For every child
Bravo Company, go!
who had a hero to believe in, comes a movie that critics are calling Tim Burton's masterpiece. It's breathtaking, unforgettable, a perfect film. And now it has been nominated for 4 Golden Globes, including Best Picture of the Year. Big Fish, rated PG-13. Now playing in select cities, opens everywhere Friday.
Which Burton directs. Written by John August, based on the novel Big Fish, a novel of mythic proportions by Daniel Wallace. This one stars Ewan McGregor, Albert Finney, Billy Crudup, Jessica Lange, Helena Bonham Carter, Allison Lohman, Robert Guillaume, how to pronounce his name, Marion Cotillard, Matthew McGorry, David Denman, Missy Pyle, Steve Buscemi, Miley Cyrus, Deep Roy, and Danny DeVito. A frustrated son tries to determine the fact from fiction in his dying father's life. Now, Scott, I remember when this came out, and this is one of those movies, this had some Oscar buzz going for it, which results in one nomination for original score. I remember people being like, it's Burton's time.
Well,
this is the
Finney
one.
get a nomination too, or am I mistaken?
There's Golden Globes liked it a lot
Fair.
more than the Oscars.
I think it was a case of a film that was the film that kind of got dinged by the Oscars moving up earlier than that was the first year that the Oscars were held in like late February versus late March.
Okay.
And that was the film didn't even go into wide release until mid-January.
Right.
And I think it was a situation. And again, I mean, Return of the King was going to win everything anyway. So I mean, that's kidding.
It's not like it's a slouch year. I mean, this is Lost
Mystic
in Translation,
River,
Master and Commander. It could have replaced Seabiscuit.
That is true.
Monster was that year. There's just a lot. There's a wealth. It's not like it's a, oh man, it's not 2008 where you're like, oh my gosh. Yeah. The Cooler, 21 Grams, Last Samurai. There's like a lot of stuff going on here.
But you're right. This was a film that was thought of as a possible Oscar contender in the run up to that season. And it got solid reviews. It got strong buzz. It was not a huge hit just because it was not a proverbial, it was only a Tim Burton film in certain ways. And I remember seeing it on opening night, and I was genuinely shocked in a good way at seeing this Tim Burton film that was set on planet Earth with real world locations, with actors like Billy Crudup wearing normal suits and working in normal office buildings. Right. And it was just such a jolt because I have to think it's the first film he's made that feels set on a recognizable in our world, basically.
But for any other director, it would have felt otherworldly. But for Burton, it's a weird pivot. And we kind of had to wonder at the time, it's like, oh, is this who Tim Burton's going to be now?
I wish that would be nice. I mean, I think, let me rephrase that. I think Burton has, we're about 20 years out from the, 19 years to the end here.
Mm-hmm.
I think he makes almost as many movies like this as what you might consider stereotypical Tim Burton cash-ins.
Yeah.
It's just, unfortunately, these films don't get the audiences that the big IP films do. So there becomes this narrative that Tim Burton has sold out and only makes, Tim Burton presents schlock from, IP, yada, yada, yada.
And part of this is to hopefully dispel a lot of that for people.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Ideally, yeah. I mean, it's not to skip ahead here, but even though I'd say his batting average is not as consistent over the next 20 years as it was in the first 15 years, I'd say it's pretty much, one for me, one for them for most of the rest of his career up to this point.
And sometimes the one for thems are all right.
Yeah, like the next film we're talking about, which I think is fine. But as far as Big Fish, simplistically speaking, it's about a man who's living a normal life with a normal, family. His father is dying, and he's always had a complicated relationship with his father because he feels the father likes to spin these tall tales about his past.
Right.
And while that may be harmless, he feels that it has robbed him of the chance to know who his father really was, because all of these stories have been seemingly embellished. And it's through these flashbacks and these tall tales where Ewan McGregor plays the young version of Billy Crudup's father that we get, a stereotypical Tim Burton mythology and visuals and story elements. In this story of a young man who joins the circus and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the entire film is very bittersweet, intentionally so. I mean, Tim Burton's father had just died, and
his mother, but he wasn't, apparently, he wasn't close with either of them, but the loss of them and this script landing at him at the same time connected.
Yeah,
in a
and
way.
it feels very therapeutic. And you could argue that a lot of his films are therapeutic, especially Edward Scissorhands, for better or worse.
Mm-hmm.
But this certainly, you're right. I would go back to what you said, because I think there was sort of a, is this what Tim Burton's going to, these are the kind of films that he's going to make for the next decade or so.
Mm-hmm.
In the same way that Steven Spielberg sort of got to a point, and this is neither good nor bad, where he stopped making movies about the underdog and started making movies about virtuous representations of the man.
Right. Which is funny because Spielberg was going to do this movie after Minority Report with Jack Nicholson in the lead. And then it was Burton with Nicholson in the lead. And then he was convinced to take McGregor and Finney over, because they were going to do Nicholson, and then they were going to try to do some sort of de-aging with Nicholson back then. Because there wasn't,
they didn't artistically.
They didn't feel the Finney part was worth hiring Nicholson for just that. You don't get Jack to just do that. I was like, well, I bet Jack would have done it, but it's so this
and
yeah.
Well, no, and I think it's to the film's benefit that it is mostly headlined by actors that you don't necessarily associate with the Tim Burton trope.
Yeah, no, yeah, definitely.
Billy Crudup, who had just done Almost Famous.
The ones that you do are in the back. Danny DeVito's
DeVito,
not in much of it. Helena Bonham Carter, they aren't in front of the movie, front and center of the movie. And the details.
The film sort of dawdles along intentionally. It's what I like to call a lazy river movie, where you're just relishing the time spent in this world. But then, of course, the last 2 or 3 scenes of the picture are just knockout punches to the ass.
Dude, I tell you, the end of this movie hits me in the field. The way they hit me in the feels, because when and I know the exact moment it does it, and it's probably a lot of people's, but it's at the funeral when the car pulls up and the giant gets out, and then DeVito gets out. But it's when DeVito approaches him to walk next to him, I just there's a look on DeVito's face that's just incredible.
And even in the scene before that, when his father's dying and he's sort of fantasizing about racing him out of the hospital for this final adventure where everybody that he knew was there to see him off to the afterlife, and that, I'll be honest, I wept like a baby.
Yeah.
And I think that was part of the part that I just graduated from college, and I sort of was getting to that point in my life where I was more impressed by, I was less moved by tragedy and sadness than by unexpected acts of goodness.
Right.
And to use an obvious lazy example, the part that makes you cry in Return of the King is when everybody bows to the hobbits.
Right.
Or and this is all in the same month. So I don't know. Have you ever seen In America?
Oh, I can't remember.
If you haven't, then I will not say much further.
Okay.
It's a very sweet melodrama about immigrants trying to make their way in America in the, I think, early 80s. If you get a chance, it's very good.
Okay.
And there's a scene at the end that just kills me every time.
Gotcha.
It's earned. I mean, it's an earned moment. And if anyone's listening to this that has seen the movie, they know exactly the scene I'm talking about.
Gotcha. Yeah, I know the title, but I'm check that out or not? I'm guessing not, but
and then Big Fish, which I think the last 2 or 3 scenes are just absolutely magnificent old school tearjerkers.
Yeah.
And I wish the film had done a little bit better. I wish it had a slightly higher profile, because again, I would have liked to have seen even more of these kind of slightly outside, I mean, a Tim Burton film almost by definition colors outside the lines, but colors outside of his lines, I guess. Especially as we get to the 2000s and especially the 2010s, when the things that once made Burton so unique and unconventional have started to become standard form for the Hollywood blockbuster.
Well, and also standard form for the Hollywood, and nobody pushing back as much on him doing his thing, or just they're bringing him in to let him go loose.
Yes, and there's but I think Big Fish is a wonderful, insightful, moving melodrama.
Yeah, and
I think it's one of his best films.
Right. Yeah, and it's very, I liked it. There's an anthology like quality to it. So, and I didn't think about this until prepping for this. It's Forrest Gump like with things, and a critic mentioned that it's like Forrest Gump without the bogus theme park politics. And I was like, yeah, it is. It's got that Forrest, and there's Benjamin Button that comes a few years later that also has that Gump quality, but that's written by the Gump guy.
It's like Benjamin Button, but not boring.
But not. Don't get me started. That movie is. I've tried. I've tried, and it doesn't hit with me. It's a well-made, well-acted film that I just don't like.
Yeah, say what you will about Forrest Gump's politics, but at least that movie is certifiably nuts.
Yeah.
I mean, I loved it then and I love it now. And it's I think it's a situation of, it's another example of, I would argue to a certain extent, empathetic films made by empathetic filmmakers that are sometimes consumed by unempathetic people. And I think, not to make this too much about Forrest Gump, but I think that's a movie that, if you take it as this ghoulishly macabre black comedy that's almost a satire on American exceptionalism, the idea that this all due respect simpleton lucks his way through both American history and unthinkable success, it's almost like that episode of The Simpsons called Homer's Enemy, where this one guy who just becomes incredibly jealous of Homer because he realizes that Homer has the American dream and he hasn't earned any of it. Or, you can look at Forrest Gump as this weird version of, the luckiest man on earth, but brings doom, despair, and misery to everyone and comes in contact with.
True. And I don't think, and there's all these reads into Forrest Gump, which I think just come as a defense mechanism to promote Pulp Fiction as a better movie. And I think
eventually that was the case. I don't think it helped that Bob Dole singled out Forrest Gump when he was talking about wholesome, family-friendly Hollywood movies.
Right.
This was in the summer of '94 when he was just starting to possibly maybe consider running for president.
Right.
And I do think the film has a following among, politically conservative people, and there's there's a case to be made that the film is not super not super thrilled with certain elements of the 1960s.
Right.
But I think it's a matter of,
I don't think it's thrown in your face either. I think people I don't think I think I don't think Forrest Gump is as deep as people think it is, but I also don't think it's as dumb as people kind of think it is.
I think it's a situation where if the film hadn't become a massive, super duper mega blockbuster, its questionable or complicated politics wouldn't have been the source of a huge part of the conversation.
I think it was meant to be this
goofy, macabre black comedy that they thought maybe would make 200 worldwide because Tom Hanks was on a streak, and they thought it'd be counter programming for The Lion King and True Lies. It was literally sandwiched between those two films. And when it became a giant piece of pop culture zeitgeist, part of the pop culture zeitgeist, then it got put under a microscope for better or worse.
I think it was meant to be mostly neutral, and then just things that weren't thought about became thought about, and they're like, okay.
But Big Fish has none of those issues.
No, Big Fish doesn't have those issues.
It does not risk infantilizing. I screwed that one up. Infantilizing the 1960s civil rights / anti-war movements.
No.
So good on them for that.
Good on it. Yeah. And we mentioned this too, with this flashback, that it's a more regular Burton film, but many of his hallmarks are here, as well as his stylish ones, but they're done in such creative ways that fit. There's a suburbia shot that feels right out of Edward Scissorhands. And what helps here too is they're presented. He's able to present things that are not as extremely extravagant, so that the son can see when the funeral scene at the end that his father's stories weren't far from the truth or were based in some truth. So when the giant shows up, you see the guy, you're like, okay, he exaggerated a little bit, but holy crap, that's a big man. And then Danny DeVito. So it's like what maybe my father wasn't. Everybody stretches a story out. Yeah,
I would argue the revelation that character has is that he got more of the truth than he thought he did from his father.
Gotcha.
And and that's it's a good one.
Yeah, it hits you in the feels. I also want to point out Alison Lohman. What a great ringer for Jessica Lange for this movie, and a great year for her too. She also had Ridley Scott's Matchstick Men, which is one of my favorite Ridley Scott films, and she was also wonderful. Drag Me to Hell years later, and just sort of fell off. I think she teaches acting now, but like, damn you people for not using more Alison Lohman, because she is wonderful. And this is kind of her. She had White Oleander, but this kind of broke her out even more. But good year for her. Everybody's wonderful in this movie. It's like, put it on with like your family. Like, it is just, any time is a good time for Big Fish. It's a sweet movie. It's nifty, and it's one that'll stick out in his filmography. It's just this, I don't know. It's interesting. It's him, but it's not, and it's great. Ewan McGregor in a Tim Burton film.
Yeah, and he's as good here as he is in any of his other more high-profile pictures.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of my favorite Burton pictures.
Yeah, it's quite good.
And the fact that it's unique among the filmography only enhances its reputation.
And when you don't have to rush out franchise pictures all the time, actors can be happy. Like a Ewan McGregor can do a Big Fish while doing franchise movies and stuff.
And that's one reason why Hugh Jackman was willing to play Wolverine for 16, 17 years.
Right.
Because for a while they were only making him once every 3 years, so he had plenty of time to host the Tonys, host the Oscars, make the Prestige, do Les Miserables, do the man from the boy from damn it. The play that he won Tonys for, the whatever. I'll look it up later.
Yes.
Hold on a second. I'm going to feel like an idiot if I leave this thing. Not The Music Man. That was many years later.
Yeah. But, like there's a reason why your Oscar Isaacs or your Daniel Radcliffes are hesitant to join franchises, because, those Harry Potter kids, that was 12 years of their life in a row. And Oscar Isaac Star Wars, well, when they're 2 years apart, the one in between is filming the other one.
Yeah, pretty much. That's what Chris Evans and Chris Hemsworth have had to deal with that specifically, and Robert Downey Jr., where it went from normally, I'll do an Iron Man every 2 to 3 years, that's fine, to shit, I have to do one of these like all the time.
Well, in Evans' case, his workout regime he had to keep up with for that long. It's in eating. It's like he wants to live a little.
Yeah.
But yes, Big Fish didn't require
Boy from Oz. Gosh darn it.
Oz. Okay, but Big Fish, didn't require anybody to stay in shape or those regimes or come back for a sequel. And
in fact, if you want to get into a little gossip, one of the reasons Jessica Lange got the role is that allegedly she was one of the few actresses of that age range that actually looked her age and didn't obviously have work done.
Oh,
think of that what you will.
All right. Well, hey, good on her. Good on her. But she has always defied odds in Hollywood since her start.
This is true.
Unfairly being, you think the bullying started with online people. There's a lot of critics you can shame on too for back then, rather than
never read any profile of any actress from the 2000s.
No. Nope. Okay. So speaking of reading, apparently Tim Burton Company did some more reading for Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, our next film, directed by...
That's the best segue you've got, speaking of reading?
It was a book from the... a book from the screenwriter of You Only Live Twice.
Shit, that is true. The man that basically made the James Bond franchise what it is, because he went nuts and nobody said, pull back, pull back.
You can enter a world where everything is delicious.
Don't lick my boat. Gonna make it all sticky. Okay?
Nothing is nutritious.
Violet, you're turning violet.
And 4 children are very...
Let's be friends. Best friends.
Malicious. From director Tim Burton.
They're testing to see if she's a bad nut.
Johnny Depp.
You're really weird.
Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Rated PG. In theaters and IMAX this Friday.
So this one, Burton, of course, directs. It's written by John August, like all the films today, from a book by Roald Dahl, starring Johnny Depp, Freddie Highmore, David Kelly, Helena Bonham Carter, Noah Taylor, who is not Ben Mendelson, Missy Pyle, James Fox, Deep Roy, Christopher Lee, Adam Godley, Franziska Trogner, Anna Sophia Robb, Julia Winter, Jordan Fry, and Philip Wygratz. A young boy wins a tour through the most magnificent chocolate factory in the world, led by the world's most unusual candy maker. Now, before we start this movie, it's been 17 years since this movie came out.
Yes.
There's probably a current reputation or thought from it when it comes up, but I want to remind people, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory was one of the highest grossing films of 2005. It was a very well reviewed movie and received an A- cinema score.
It made about $470 million worldwide. That was a lot more than Batman Begins that year. And off the top of my head, I think it was behind only Harry Potter 4, Revenge of the Sith. Well, no, actually it's behind quite a few things because you had King Kong and
it was
anyway, King Kong, Narnia, Star Wars, Harry Potter. But after those, then yeah.
But hey, top 10, top 8.
Yeah.
But there's
and
a lot.
It was, it had a $56 million opening weekend. It was, it crossed 200 million domestic. Again, it made more than Batman Begins here and abroad. And without skipping too far ahead, the pre-release chatter was kind of insane for this film because you had pundits and people that should have known better arguing that parents are going to be unwilling to take their kids to see it because Johnny Depp's Willy Wonka looked too much like Michael Jackson, which would scare off parents because even back then there were conversations about allegations involving child molestation and or abuse from Michael Jackson, who of course would die 4 years later, but I digress.
Yeah.
And of course that turned out to be absolutely fucking ridiculous.
Yep.
When you see the film, he's nothing like Michael Jackson. He hates children, which is actually
there's some.
Okay.
There's some. I know it's not the intention.
Yeah.
But I could imagine if Michael Jackson had kids dropped off at his house, and parents wanted parents wanted to stay, and he wasn't prepared for that. Like he was the babysitter, but the parents stayed. Not that I'm not saying Michael Jackson was intended to molest children, but I'm just saying, like, I'm not good with adults.
He might kill them in his chocolate factory.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not good with adults. I don't know how to talk to them. I believe, intentionally or unintentionally, I can see some Michael Jackson in this.
That's fair. That's fair.
Not in ways that they're saying.
Exactly.
I can see this.
But nonetheless, any concerns about the film's commercial potential were completely ridiculous. The movie opened with $56 million in its opening weekend, which was one of the biggest non-sequel openings of all time, even at that point in history. And as far as the movie, I think it's fine. Do I think it's overall as good of a movie as the 1971 version with Gene Wilder? Not necessarily, but I think, if I'm honest with myself, I think Wilder is the only element, one of the few elements that is vastly superior to this picture, to this second picture. I think the first third, before they get to the chocolate factory, is actually a lot better in this version. Maybe that's just because it's more colorful and brighter and all that jazz. And I do think that the chocolate factory stuff itself is fine. I do think it falters a little bit in terms of trying to be so faithful to the novel that it barely has an ending. So it kind of has to invent an ending. And, say what you will about, and, the 71 version is terrific, but the Slugworth thing was invented for the movie so that Charlie had to make a choice in order to advance to the end. And I think in terms of screenwriting and storytelling, that's actually a terrific addition.
Yes.
But, it's a visual delight. I remember I saw it on IMAX at a midnight screening, and it was 185, so it took up the entire IMAX screen.
Oh, yeah.
And let me tell you, that's a movie that played very well on a giant ass IMAX screen.
Burton likes to shoot 185. That's what I like, and I think 185 has become a highly underappreciated format because everybody does the 235, but not everybody knows how to shoot for it. They just know that big serious movies from back in the day were shot in 235, but I'm like 185 can be pretty damn good, and Burton's very good at shooting 185.
And it's weird, if I may, when I periodically will watch bits and pieces of the first Avengers, which of course was shot in 185.
Right. Yep.
It actually looks and feels bigger than some of its much bigger and more expensive predecessors. There is a sense of scale.
Russo's.
There is a certain sense of scale and maybe it's just old-fashioned filmmaking skill that makes that film feel a lot bigger than its budget is, which of course was one reason why it was a huge hit.
Yeah.
I do think that's a film that benefited from the taller aspect ratio.
Right. So yeah, this movie, when revisiting it, like I'm like, this is pretty good. And this is supposed to be like a terrible one or whatever. I'm like, this is not bad at all. Like we have another musical from Tim Burton, and I like the choice to go with this like psychedelic edge of the music, which would have been the music when the first movie was around.
Yes.
But I don't think he's replacing Gene Wilder's iteration anytime soon, but I kind of like Depp's Wonka. Like he cracks me up because he's kind of a shit, and he totally feels. I'll give it this, more than Gene Wilder's Wonka. He certainly feels like someone who's been secluded and not in any social situations with other people in a very long time. And so Depp said he derived it from children's show hosts like Captain Kangaroo and Mr. Rogers and like various game show hosts as well. But I thought in this movie, since we've been going through the Tim Burton stuff, his relationship with the children in this movie reminded me of Pee Wee Herman and the bully type kids in Pee Wee's Big Adventure.
Yeah, I can see that.
It was very much like he didn't care what an adult will say, but when a kid does it, he's got to prove himself.
And, this is one of the few examples of a Roald Dahl. Did I pronounce that right?
Roald Dahl?
That's... Anyway, rest in peace.
It's Roald Dahl, Mr. Blofeld.
a Roald Dahl adaptation that was actually a commercial success, which, Netflix made this big deal a couple years ago to do a bunch of Roald Dahl adaptations. Like, there's only one of these that really worked, and it was because it was a big budget Tim Burton fantasy starring Johnny Depp back when that was a big deal.
Yep.
And it was based on the one book that everybody's read. But anyway, we'll see.
Well,
but no, it's a solid 3-star picture.
Yep. First time Depp was immediately approved for a Burton movie.
Yeah. And, again, without getting into his off-screen transgressions, it's another example of where he's not just doing shtick. He's making concerted, specific choices and crafting a very real character.
Yeah.
He's not phoning it in. He's not coasting on the makeup or the hat or whatever.
Right.
It's a genuinely compelling supporting turn.
Yeah.
Because it is a supporting performance. He doesn't show up to the first, third of the movie, give or take.
Correct.
And it better or worse than the 71 version. I mean, on one hand, it doesn't matter, but I will say that if it had had a better ending for Charlie, which, to be fair, again, this is another situation where he's dealing with the death of his father, and now that has affected him for obvious reasons. And that sort of feels almost shoehorned in. As well as what seems to be a quest to, he put Vincent Price in his last movie, and he damn sure was going to put Christopher Lee in his last movie.
Yeah.
I don't think he pulled that one off. I'll have to double check. To be fair, for a while, we thought Christopher Lee was going to live forever.
Well, no, Christopher Lee was in Sleepy Hollow. Then he's in this. He'll appear in our next film we talk about as well with the voice. So he's.
Was he in Frankenweenie?
Can't remember.
I should look that up.
We'll know soon. But this one, this is a film that like people is cash in, remake everything. The Roald Dahl estate wanted this movie because he wanted this movie. He wanted, like Stephen King with The Shining, he wanted a better adaptation of his book. So I hope he believed that he wrote the perfect adaptation of You Only Live Twice, because hypocrite. So they were going to do this.
Well, the ghost of Kevin McClory still get the rights to that one too.
Yeah. But for Burton, and I'm noticing this a bit of a theme here that's been kind of happening. It's another film like Planet of the Apes, I guess, like Batman, that was going through a lot of pre-production and names before he took the helm. Like,
yeah,
I'm noticing he's picking up these things that were like sitting around forever. Like Martin Scorsese was once going to do this movie, so that
You're
makes
kidding.
sense. No, and he was
this like a trade-off for After Hours?
No, he was. So Burton was a late announcement. It was going to be him, but he decided to do The Aviator instead. And now this makes sense why Hugo exists. Martin Scorsese was looking to do a children's family movie, apparently. So, but there's a lot of other names. They were trying to make this since 1990.
I'll have to say, of all of the Martin Scorsese mob movies, Hugo is my favorite.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's the best, yeah. But yeah, so this I like the look of the movie. There's some of it that feels samey to the 70s film, but that could just be some really clearly defined text being adapted. And yeah, I think part of the problem people have is there's a childhood staple and iconic performance being redone here, so immediately the Dukes are up, even though Depp goes nowhere where Gene Wilder goes.
And I think one reason why this film works, at least for me, is that Burton was not a huge fan of the 1971 version. And whether I disagree with that or not, and I do think that it's still a very good movie.
Yeah.
It didn't feel a similar situation as with Planet of the Apes, where it's like he was approaching a film that he loved and thought was this, perfect masterpiece, but let's also do something else.
Mm-hmm.
Right or wrong, he felt there was room for improvement.
Right.
And so you have him doing his thing.
Yeah. I mean, the film has a lot of added depth and background, for better or for worse, in here. In a sense, to maybe a lesser degree for people, but this is something reminded me of Nightmare Alley and then Guillermo del Toro's Nightmare Alley from last year, where essentially there's the same thing going on here, but the one's pumped more. Like, they're both doing the same film, but they have different reasons to do that film.
Yes.
And they work together in many ways. Like they work. And there's enough background of Willy Wonka, but sure, make a whole Timothée Chalamet film about stuff.
I'm hearing good things about that one.
Well, good.
The guy that directed the Paddington movies, and it's an original musical. And without getting too far off the reservation here, I mean, I think Warner Brothers tends to make big budget blockbusters, or would-be blockbusters, that are on the whole pretty good.
Okay.
Especially when you move away from the complicated narrative surrounding the DC Comics stuff of the last decade. I mean, you're just as likely to get, a Kong Skull Island.
Yeah.
Or The Meg, or Ready Player One, which, Miracle of Miracles, is a good movie.
Right.
And sure, that's because of Spielberg, but they still got him to sign on the dotted line.
They did. No, I was surprised going how much I enjoyed this, returning to it. I was hesitant about this one. I didn't remember not liking it back then, but it's time isn't kind sometimes. And going to this, I'm like, I can watch this again easily. Like, this is quite enjoyable. And it's well directed, it's fun. And I really, like I said, I cracked up at Johnny Depp a bunch.
Yeah. He's funny.
He is. They don't force him to sing. All the songs are Oompa Loompa, and then a little pre-recorded song when all the characters melt down at the beginning. This is early. There's some early CG stuff in here too that better or worse. Most of it holds up because he did a lot of practical. And while Scott and I are fans of this movie, apparently Gene Wilder, not a fan. Not a fan.
Gene Wilder, what?
Gene Wilder was not a fan of this movie.
Oh, I'm sure he wouldn't be, and I don't begrudge him that. I mean, it's basically a movie that, at least in the mind of some of the filmmakers, existed because they weren't happy with the first one. You know, I'm sure Stanley Kubrick loved the TV version of The Shining that came
I
out
would have loved that review.
in the late 90s.
I would have loved that review.
Like, oh, I mean, my movie's good, but Steven Weber, wow. That's mean. He's perfectly good in the film.
As a regular watcher of Wings, I was hesitant to see Weber in the role, but gosh.
And you know, to be fair, I mean, I like The Shining, but it's its own weird, bonkers, bananas thing. I think the miniseries is a more faithful and more grounded adaptation of that same source material.
Okay.
You know, they can, just like these two Willy Wonka films, they can sit side by side.
Yes.
They are different enough.
Yeah.
That they both, you know, they pass the, you know, this one passes the Amazing Spider-Man test, which is that it's different enough from its predecessors that if you want to watch a film from this quote unquote franchise, you might pick this one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very much. Yeah. All right. So,
And it's not setting up a sequel or a franchise. Isn't that
no,
nice?
they didn't do the Great Glass Elevator movie.
No.
They made the money and they got the reviews to say, yeah, we could look into that, but they didn't. Just like Planet of the Apes, they did not.
Well, that was because they knew they dodged
a
bullet.
Yeah. True.
I wonder why they did. I mean, I think there's a complicated issue with the Great Glass Elevator rights.
Okay.
I don't know what they are.
Gotcha.
Maybe it was because Roald Dahl didn't like the first 71 movie and said no, never again. I'm stalling for time to look it up.
Yeah,
I'm genuinely curious. No, there's nothing here offhand.
Freddie Highmore is great too as a Charlie. I really liked all the people, like, and just using I'm not familiar with the actor who played the grandfather, but it's nice to see a bunch of fresh faces. He's using Missy Pyle a lot in roles.
Yes.
Here in a run of stuff. So she's
David Kelly, who was in such films as Waking Ned Devine. That was one of, at least later in his life, that was one of his more mainstream pictures. But he's a character actor.
Gotcha. I figured he wasn't nobody.
I'm amused by you referring to he would have been like 75 at that point as a fresh face.
Yes. Yeah. Newcomer.
No, he passed away in 2012 at the age of 82.
Gotcha. The world did end there for him. 82, not bad. That's without further ado, we'll just move like 2 months later for Tim Burton and talk about the Corpse Bride.
If you think life is a party,
Well, hello.
hit it, boys. Wait till you discover the afterlife.
Sounds creepy.
Johnny Depp.
There's been a mistake. Oh, I'm not dead. Oh. Roll over. Good.
Tim Burton's Corpse Bride. Rated PG. In select cities, September 16th, starts September 23rd every week.
Which he directs this time with animated. This one is written by John August, again, with Caroline Thompson, Pamela Petler, based on characters by Tim Burton and Carlos Grangel, starring Johnny Depp, Helena Bonham Carter, Emily Watson, Jim Carrey, Tracy Ullman, Joanna Lumley, Paul Whitehouse, Albert Finney, Richard E. Grant, June Foray, Michael Goff, Christopher Lee, Kelsey Grammer, Danny Elfman, David Ogden Stiers, Frank Welker, and Deep Roy. So Deep Roy doing a lot of work. Tim Burton likes working with Deep Roy. Christopher Lee continues. Michael Goff continues. Got Depp, Carter, just all around. So when a shy groom practices his wedding vows in the inadvertent presence of a deceased young woman, she rises from the grave, assuming he has married her. Cool note here. This is from the opening credit. This is early work by Leica Studios. This is their first feature film contract work. They had a short called Moon Girl the same year. They were previously known as Will Vinton Studios from the late 90s through the 2005, but all they did was like commercials and little segments of things. This was their first. So if you're like, man, that Coraline stuff looks like Burton, they were working with Burton.
Well, and of course, Coraline was directed by Henry Selick.
and Henry Selick, who was Nightmare Before Christmas. But 2 films within 2 months of each other. This is like James Wan with The Conjuring and Insidious, almost chapter 2 almost. But production on this began during Big Fish and went on through Wonka when he was doing it, with Johnny Depp recording both roles at the same time. During the day, he was Willy Wonka. At night, he was, is it Victor?
Victor Van Dort.
Yes, they do a little Victor Victoria nod here with the 2 names. But yeah, Scott, thoughts on Corpse Bride?
I've always enjoyed this one more than Nightmare Before Christmas, even though it's arguably a less flashy picture. I just think the character arcs are more compelling. Every time I watch Nightmare Before Christmas, even as a kid, we discussed this a couple weeks ago. He's a psychopath. He's either totally deluded or he's just completely moronic. But even as a kid, it's like, why does he think this is going to work? What does he think is going to happen? Why are we rooting for him to do this? This is a terrible, terrible idea. Why would somebody tell him this is stupid? But anyway, this at least is a more, conventional quote unquote narrative with characters that are actually wholly sympathetic. And even the slightly antagonistic character that is the Corpse Bride, played by Helena Bonham Carter, she certainly, we sympathize with her. She's a person of pity. The animation is gorgeous. The songs aren't as catchy and memorable as Nightmare Before Christmas, but that's not a deal breaker.
This is wedding day. This is wedding day.
It feels better paced than Nightmare Before Christmas. That's a film that, in my opinion, just stops and starts and stops and starts. And it's another film that's like, I'm curious what made, other than just pure artistic drive, it's like, hey, I think I'll go back and make another stop motion animation film in the middle of these really big and or personal live action pictures.
Yeah.
And it's, I'm sure it was just that, because he could and because he wanted to. And, this film was released by Warner Brothers in late 2005. So it wasn't quite, it was a hit. It made more money than Nightmare Before Christmas. It made $118 million on a 40 budget.
Yeah. And it could probably thank the reputation of Nightmare Before Christmas.
Oh, absolutely.
Well.
Yeah. But this was a lower profile release, even though it was, by any rational standards, it was a hit. Visually, and this isn't a bold statement, but it, the real world is dark, grim, and gray, while the underworld is bright and colorful and full of life. The real world is dead, while the world of the dead is alive.
Some really easy to see subtlety, but it's good. Yeah.
But again, it's a kid's film, so it's very well acted. It's very well performed. Richard E. Grant is obviously having fun as the bad guy. And I don't have that much to say about it because it wears its themes and its heart on its sleeve. So there's not a lot of hidden meaning other than what you see is what you get. But what you get is relatively compelling. And I did rewatch this one because I hadn't seen it in many, many years, and it does hold up.
It's really quick too. It is.
It's about as long as Nightmare Before Christmas. It's only 77 minutes with credits.
Yeah.
And what struck me again about it this time is how unassuming it is. It's just this really good, really solid stop motion animation horror comedy. And it's not, it almost makes a point to be a non-event, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
And that's all. Yeah, I'll let you talk because I've been babbling.
Yeah, no, it's we got another musical. We're gonna have 3 of those in a row from Tim Burton, which is something you don't probably think of. Like, he's done a bunch of musicals. And yeah, this is back to, this is his drawings come to life, doing the stop motion. Now the actors recorded together during this too. It's kind of crazy how well this works. And there's the 2 worlds are great. They're fun to watch. I love the Peter Lorre worm. It's like, but yeah, it's a rather simple story. Like there's not much to dig into to find. It is what it is. It's a fairy tale that, you never really heard much. It works too well. I feel bad for the Corpse Bride herself. Her redemption is like saving him, and then she's gone. But I feel bad for her that Emily.
It's a tragedy.
It's a tragedy for her, what's happened to her and where it goes, because he decides, well, this is what I'm at right now. I'm gonna accept this, but
and she realizes that she can't be happy in a way that makes other people miserable.
Right.
And it is poignant.
Yeah.
Because she is a victim through and through.
Yeah. Continue to be alone in the dead world, which sucks.
Yeah.
Yeah. It wasn't time for Victor to go.
And I think it's a testament to how well the film works, in that Victor and Victoria are almost immediately a sympathetic, root for them couple.
Yeah.
That you're almost rooting against the primary action of the film, which is Victor being kidnapped to the underworld and running around the world of the dead and experiencing sights in a way that keeps basically denies us what we want, which is a reunion between this happy couple.
Yeah.
And while our sympathy is certainly supposed to be with Emily for obvious reasons, she's also the woman that is sort of the woman that prevents that which we desire.
Right. There's a great, with Victor and Victoria, especially when there's a great authenticity to the dialogue and the way it's performed.
Yes.
That scene where they meet each other, because they're a forced marriage, but different motives from each of them's parents as to why they want, one wants wealth, one wants stature, somewhat to get them married. And there's their meeting of each other, and it's just like they're perfect for each other in the non-perfect situation, is what it feels, and you're immediately drawn to them, and don't like the missteps in the rehearsal and all sorts of stuff. And you generally are rooting, because it's an honest incident with Victor. It's not like he pulled some sort of purposeful mess that he's got to clean up. It's an accident, and he almost accepts the accident just because he's such a nice guy.
Pushover. Yeah, he's a pushover. Excuse me.
But yeah, there's some funny moments in this. There's great, Burton, obviously the interesting world of the dead compared to the living. I mean, there's more than just like one's lack of color and one's so colorful. There's like watching people go through everyday motions of like soulless jobs and stuff like that, compared to everybody partying down in the land of the dead, which is quite a interesting little contrast.
Tim Burton's Titanic.
But yeah, there's not a whole, it's so quick, it's easy. I like this one probably just as much as Nightmare Before Christmas. Like it's different enough that the animations, like, it's Burton, it's like that Nightmare Before Christmas, but it's not. But yeah, I definitely dig it quite a bit. Dig it back up. Check it out.
The film, just for reference, it made 118 million worldwide on a 40 budget. Solid hit.
Let's talk about the box office of our three films, because we didn't stop to do that with each of them. So, Stainboy, how did that do? No, just kidding. Big
billions
Fish.
And billions of dollars.
Big Fish. Let's go with
Big
that.
Big Fish did 123, but it was on a 70 budget.
Okay.
Again, this was in the middle of the DVD boom, so it wasn't all despair and whatever. I'm sure the film broke even in the end.
Yeah.
So, and again, it's not like they were trying to make a franchise. Again, they weren't trying to make a franchise out of it. So you can have these one and done pictures that barely squeak by, and no harm, no foul.
Very true.
Charlie and the Chocolate Factory made $475 million on a 150 budget.
Okay.
And then The Corpse Bride made 118 on 40.
Okay. Gotcha. Everlasting Legacy. That's back when that was like, hey, good job. And it's like, not enough. Now it's like, not enough.
No, you're absolutely right. It's it used to be enough for this movie to make money in relation to expectations and budget, and then you move on to the next movie.
Right.
Each one's this little small business. And that's the advantage that streaming, of course, has over theatrical, is that they don't have to treat it. It's all one giant. It's a salad bar. It's a buffet.
Right.
you know, the very fact that they have the new Melissa McCarthy movie is of value, even regardless of whether anyone likes or watches that new Melissa McCarthy movie.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
I don't mean to pick on her. Just it's Adam Sandler, same thing.
Yeah.
But for, you know, for theaters and for studios, it's each film is its own little business that is, you know, successful or not successful almost by itself.
True.
But anyway.
Yeah. But yeah, so that'll do it for this 5th installment here. We've got 2 more and then one for Wednesday coming after this. So next time we're doing what I call Sweeney to Weenie, as we'll be talking about Sweeney Todd, jump-starting a Disney trend with Alice in Wonderland, finally doing Dark Shadows. I believe that was a big something hanging around. We'll talk more about that. And then another animated one with Frankenweenie, the second coming of Frankenweenie. That'll be our next installment, part 6. Stay tuned. We also should be joined by a friend of the show and frequent guest, Sabina Graves, for that one. If not, then that didn't happen, and we still love you, Sabina. So, Scott, you got a new place to find you now. So,
well, hopefully I'll have a bigger stack of articles by the time you actually watch or listen to this, because I just started at the Wrap 3 days ago. And right now I'm basically helping them with the breaking news while slowly doing, you know, my own quote unquote deep dives, my words, not theirs. So hopefully I'll have more of those along with the whatever else needs to be done. But yeah, thewrap.com. And, you know, my Forbes archive is not going to vanish off the face of the earth. You can still go and read them there. And, you know, I don't get paid for that anymore, but that's fine. And I'll still be on Twitter at Scott Mendelson.
All right. And I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Brand4KUHD, written work at whysoblue.com. There's more from the Brand Peters Show this week. There's Old Space Show Knight Rider going on. Check that out. But yeah, Scott and I will be back. More Burton. Until then, stay film positive.
Thank you for listening. The Brandon Peters Show is a Creative Zombie Studios production. Produced by Brad Shoemaker and Brandon Peters. Written and edited by Brandon Peters. Announcer vocals by Jessica Alsman. Theme song by Metavari. Web design and show art by Brad Shoemaker with Brandon Peters. All music and clips featured in the episode are property of their respective studios, and no infringement is intended. Additional information on this and other episodes at BrandonPetersShow.com. For any inquiries, press opportunities, or sponsorship, contact mail at BrandonPetersShow.com. The show is available on Apple Music, Spotify, or anywhere podcasts are found.